Many people talk of the future possibility of soaring above the clouds, through the atmosphere, and making it all the way to other worlds. And even though we have yet to accomplish that wonderful feat, we've gotten at least far enough to touch down on one of the closest celestial bodies to our planet. Granted, this happened many decades ago, but nevertheless, we've gotten to the moon. Likewise, we've also managed to construct habitable havens on some of the most extreme parts of the world for the purpose of doing research and admiring the trivial antics of the native wildlife. Antarctica is one such place, and unlike Mars or the Moon, it doesn't require a spacecraft to get to. A simple, everyday, run of the mill airplane will suffice. In fact, Antarctica is known to have over 20 airports stationed throughout the continent. But as accessible as it is, there are only about 1,000 to 5,000 people residing in the continent at any given time, depending on the season, virtually all of whom are scientists, and none of whom are permanent residents. But just why is it that humans have managed to touch down and reside in sufficient numbers on nearly every corner of the globe except Antarctica? Well, it's too damned cold. That would be the short answer, but since you clicked on this 10-minute video expecting to be entertained, educated, and enlightened, we'll move forward in giving you the elaborate explanation you expect. An explanation as to why there are virtually no people living in Antarctica, and what it would take for it to become a desirable destination. As fascinating as it would be, seeing someone who harbors the would-be physical features, language, and customs of a native Antarctican, unfortunately, as resilient as we are, no human population has laid indigenous claim to the territory. This is not to say that there have been no humans born on the continent, however. On the contrary, there have been at least 10 people born in Antarctica at varying times. But as much as they may like to claim the title of native Antarctican, that spot, I'm afraid, is reserved for the penguins. I'm quite sure that they would prefer humans to stay far away from their territory, lest we bring our questionable habits with us and ruin their colorful, or should I say black and white, way of life. But let's say we did decide to someday try cohabiting with the penguins and move large numbers of people to Antarctica. Just what would have to happen to make that possible? Well, according to various sources, such a thing used to be very much possible. Antarctica wasn't always cold, dry, and covered with ice sheets. Over 170 million years ago, Antarctica was actually a part of the supercontinent Gondwana and had, like other continents, hosted a completely different climate and average temperature than today. As early as 40 to 50 million years ago, during the Eocene period, Yale News report suggests that what we know of as a frozen tundra, destitute of diverse wildlife, had once had a temperature that was comparable to modern-day California. As Antarctica is one of the coldest, driest, most desolate places on Earth, it's quite hard to imagine that now. But geological drilling suggests that in the distant past, the land of the penguins used to be a tropical paradise. It was a green and beautiful place, stated Professor Jane Francis from Leeds University School of Earth and Environment. Lots of furry mammals, including possums and beavers, lived there. The weather was tropical. It is only in the recent geological past that it got so cold. The cooling of Antarctica was said by scientists to have started about 37 million years ago, between the Eocene and Oligocene epochs. The greenhouse climate that remained warm until the extinction of dinosaurs became gradually colder and eventually created what is known as an icehouse effect, a phenomenon in which waters around Antarctica continuously fill up with ice. And now, millions of years later, Antarctica hosts an ice sheet that covers 14 million square miles and contains around 90% of the Earth's fresh water supply, and under this ice lies a vast cemetery of dead ancient continents, once teeming with life. Some suggest that despite the severe conditions of current Antarctica, that global warming is, pardon the expression, making Antarctica green again. Although the continent is currently too harsh for permanent human settlement, studies predict that by the 2200s, the temperature of certain parts of West Antarctica will be roughly comparable to that of modern day Alaska and northern Scandinavia, and sources suggest that eventually even cultivation of farms and crops could be possible in the northern areas of the continent. This, of course, is only an estimation and depends on the fickle whims of Mother Nature to become realistic. And although it is currently our best bet to wait out the centuries before attempting to colonize Antarctica, due to the sheer impracticability and undesirability of terraforming and living on the continent, ideas have been put forth that suggest current colonization could, with extreme effort, be possible. One common idea proposed in the 1950s was the concept of constructing cities built under glass domes. These domes, had they been completed, would have been equipped with an artificial light source as a substitute for the sun to illuminate the area during the dark months, as well as mining towns for the purpose of extracting potentially rare minerals. One of the advocates of this plan, an American architect named Buckminster Fuller, actually published a proposal for a domed city in 1965, suggesting in it that Antarctica would be a likely first location for the project, should the idea ever come to pass. And later, on a smaller scale, versions of the dome were actually constructed, but unfortunately, they were only able to house small numbers of scientific buildings, rather than an entire civilization. Despite the initial enthusiasm about these domes, there were said to have been potential issues with having an atomic-driven generator due to the power and temperature regulation, the result of which potentially turning stations using these generators into pollution hazards. Even with these concerns, however, many authors have tried, mostly unsuccessfully, to update these models to something more acceptable. On the surface, it seems like it would be quite convenient to have the extra space a landmass like Antarctica could provide. After all, it is one of the 7 major continents, and is larger than both Europe and Australia. And with 8 billion people in the world, with the number growing every year, it could be pretty useful to have some emergency storage down south should we run out of room everywhere else. But despite the proposals of these new authors, there's a series of international agreements known as the Antarctic Treaty System that limits the amount of activity that takes place on the continent. And before any country were to attempt anything, the treaty would first need to be altered or eliminated before any major operations could legally take place. Despite this, many countries have attempted to put forth territorial claims on certain parts of Antarctica, only to have their efforts fail due to lack of international recognition of their plans. These treaties may seem like an annoyance to modern-day aspiring colonists who wish to expand their territories, but they're actually put in place for good reason. Some people may infer that if what's preventing us from living on Antarctica are cold temperatures and infinite stretches of ice deserts, that we'd be better off if we just melted the ice away ourselves, so we can lay claim to the continent as another human home. But, like all things that are too good to be true, there are drawbacks to this intentional course of action. As it turns out, studies show that Antarctica's ice is melting even without our help. Gravity data retrieved from the GRACE satellite show that since 2002, Antarctica has been losing 24 cubic miles of ice on average per year, and even recent studies suggest that Antarctica is continuing to lose ice at an accelerated rate. Now this, of course, would validate the earlier suggestion that some of Antarctica could eventually be ripe for vegetation. But Antarctica and other Arctic territories losing their ice may not necessarily mean more space for us humans to expand civilization. This is because if all of the ice covering Antarctica and mountain glaciers around the world were to melt, then the ocean would cover many, if not all, depending on how much melts, coastal cities around the world. And all those cities away from the coast, Chicago for instance, may last, we may have to say goodbye to places like California and Florida. Land area would shrink significantly, and much of our infrastructure would be disturbed by this rise in sea level. The melting of this ice may, therefore, have an inversely proportional effect, meaning that when land somewhere becomes available due to melting ice, land elsewhere may be covered by rising sea levels. It may seem odd that there have been less people who have been born on Antarctica than have been to the moon, but according to the available information, for now, it may be best for us to take a back seat and let the scientists enjoy their experiments in isolation. And maybe in about 200 years, we can consider letting our descendants join them.